Okay, so question 5, what we're going to do here is an engine failure occurs in the desert and a breakdown point which is 20 kilometres from the road leading to Alice. As illustrated, Sally can walk across the desert at 5 kilometres an hour and along the road at 10 kilometres an hour. She is out of water and knows that the best she can last is 7 hours in 52 degrees C heat. She decides to aim for a point X on the road, walking in a straight line from point B to X, and then from X to A. Alright, so you got the scenario. I think it makes sense to have an understanding of that scenario. So she's in the desert, she knows she can walk faster on bitumen than she can on sand. And that's true. Alright? And so she's only got, obviously, she's made a brave move, which is left the car, walking to try and get help from, obviously where she's stuck. Quite often in the desert, the best thing to do would be to stay with your vehicle. Right? Certainly if people know that you are out in the desert somewhere and you're supposed to be back in 2 days or 1 day, they'll come looking for you. Right? It's about being prepared. So quite often people who walk away from their car are the ones that die. Not saying it. Yeah, possibly. Alright. So now if we're looking at this particular scenario, the good thing about this question is you have a lot of information already labelled on it. We're going to need to relabel some of this information though. Alright? So again, with this question, it's about not necessarily going off and solving it ourselves. But what you'll find is the question leads you through what you need to do. But if we've got this concept here, that's 20 kilometres in that position there. We know this is X. So what's this distance here going to be? What's that distance going to be here? That's X there. It's going to be 30 take X, isn't it? Alright? Now, any suggestions how we might be able to find BX? Pythag. Definitely Pythag. Okay, to find that. So if we just go through these questions, that's really what we're going to use. We'll then say the distance, the time it's going to take her to walk through the desert is going to be obviously 5 times by the distance, and then obviously the time it takes to walk along there is going to be related to the speed that she walks and that distance there. All right, so if we get an equation with X in it, we can probably then look to find the minimal time it could take her and possibly the point where she should aim for X. So having a bit of an idea of maths could save your life. Bear Grylls would know all about this stuff. Okay? Alright? Maybe not. Alright, so let's do this one here. Nx equals X. Find the distance XA. Alright, so we've already said what XA is. That's equal to 30 take X. BX. So we could say BX is going to be equal to the square root of, is it 20 squared plus X squared? So you might even write that as equal to the square root of 400 plus X squared. And that's what the distance of BX is equal to. Part B says the time equals the distance divided by the speed. Find the time taken to walk from B to X. Right, so if we do the time, part B, our time is going to be our distance. So the distance that we're walking is in fact 400 plus X squared. The time of the speed that they walk at is 5 kilometres in the sand. Alright, so that's part 1. Part 2 over here, what we're looking at over here is if we're walking from X to A, well, we know the speed that you're walking there is at 10. So the time that's going to take to walk that distance. Now, we can say the time for XBX. This is the time for AX. This is the time for XA, isn't it? Alright, so that's going to be equal to 30 take X all over 10, because they're going at double the speed. Then part C says, if T is the total time taken to travel from B to X to A, show that that there is the equation. Can you see I've got really that equation? Can you see that there and that's the same? Isn't it really? So it says show, so what you have to do is you actually have to show exactly what you're doing. So you say Tx, right, is equal to the time from B to X plus the time from X to A. And so you then just say that's equal to X squared plus 400, because that's how they've written it. And that's all over 5. And then you're going to add that to 30 take X all over 10. So it's pretty obvious what you've got to do, but I've just showed the steps there. Okay, so showing says show the tedious steps. All right. The next part of that question says, all right, use technology to help sketch a graph of Tx function. Now, without even doing this on my calculator, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the time, and I want to do what? I want to minimize that, don't I? So I know I'm looking for a function that goes something like that, and I'm looking for that point there. So that will tell me the distance to minimize the time. Okay, so this is what I need to go to my calculator. So y equals, right, so I've got to put that into my calculator. So the first function is the square root of x squared plus 400. Maybe not 4,000. Delete that. And then I go to the next bit, and then I have to divide that by divide that by 5, and then I have to add on to that bracket 30 take x bracket, and I have to divide that by 10. Right, so just basically putting the formula you see it into the calculator. Then what I'm doing over here is I'm going to graph that, and I'm looking to see that I've done that correctly, and I hopefully will get a function that goes, has a minimum value. So obviously I don't have the right value there, so what I can do is I could go zoom 0, and that will give me part of my function in there, and you can see that I've got my minimum value in there somewhere. Alright, so now I need to set my scale that's going to work for that. So what I might do is I might make my maximum y value of something like probably make my maximum y value something like 8, and make my min y value maybe something like 2. I'll graph that. Right. So if I just change that, I can play around with that if I like. Obviously I can play around with that a lot if I like. So I can make that much bigger, and that will just make that look a lot smaller. So I can make that 0 if I wanted to. Alright, so if I go 0 and make that something like 20. Don't get a lot of curve there, do I? I can play around. I'll probably need to go closer in reality to something like what I had before, which is 8. Right, and graph that. You know, the fact it doesn't really matter in terms of what I've got there, but as long as you can see that you've got a turning point there, then that's the main thing that I've got. Okay, so I'm really interested in that point there. That's what I'm interested in. So obviously I'm going to go to my calculator. Even if it hasn't asked me to do that, I'm going to find my min value, which is 3. So I'm going to go my left hand bound. So I'm going to scroll that way. See my crosshairs. Go make sure I go to the left hand side of my min value. Okay, and then I'm going to go enter. Go to the right hand side of my value. Enter, enter. And what that tells me my x value for the minimum time. The minimum time it's going to take is 6.46 hours, and that's when x is 11.55 kilometres from B. Alright, so if I do that back into my graph, so that point, 11.55, and that was 6.56 or something like that. Okay, so that's my sketch. You obviously need to label your axes. Using technology, find the shortest time to reach Alice. Okay, and how far from X does that need to be? So my shortest time is in fact this value here, and I'm not going to worry about setting it out for you, because I know you can do that. And then my minimum distance from X, how far from X, X is from N for the optimal solution. Well, remember N is this point up here. So we know our X is in fact 11.55 from that distance. So actually that solution gives me both of those answers. Right? It's about understanding what you're getting there for your answers, isn't it? So the minimum time, and you probably need to state it, so the minimum time is equal to 6.56 hours. So you're going to be cutting it fine. And then F, the minimal distance, so X is 11.55 kilometres from N. So just really just stating the answers that you've got there from that.